So I'll tell you what policymakers say to me, and they've been saying this to me for over 20 years in Washington. Right, I've been through now a number of administrations, from Bush to Obama to Trump to Biden and back to Trump, and that is, I want to get back to this issue of the opposition. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt in my mind that millions of Iranians despise this regime. Maybe it's even the majority of Iranians that want to see the end of the Islamic Republic. There's no doubt to me that a free Iran would be a prosperous and successful Iran, because I've always said that the only place where Iranians don't succeed in the world is inside the Islamic Republic of Iran. I grew up in Toronto, Taranto, as they call it. I've been in communities in Los Angeles and in New York and around the world. And it's always remarkable to me how successful Iranians are wherever they go. The only place where they've been denied that success is inside the Islamic Republic of Iran, because of its brutality and its corruption and its repression. But what policymakers say to me is, Mark, if we could only get a unified Iranian opposition inside the country and outside the country, then we would have a unified opposition to work with. And we must have a unified opposition if we're able to take on the thugs of the Islamic Republic. So bring me back a unified opposition, and then we'll talk about maximum support for the opposition. What do you say to that objection?
Look, the expectation of seeing more unity among opposition is not an unfair expectation. The question is, there are many elements that expedites and encourages more unity in an opposition as a direct result of your own behavior vis-a-vis the issue. Look, what would be the incentive of an Iranian activist, dissident, political prisoner, irrespective of their political persuasions, to think that they have a chance to overcome a regime that will execute a singer for just singing a song against them, while you're sitting here continuing to negotiate with the regime and its representatives, not taking any action against their behavior, because while they're taking hostages, they still have elements related directly either to the top heads of the regime and their families that are money laundering in Toronto or in London, or have members of their families that are employed by the US government that have direct relation to the IRGC, for instance. When they see all of that happening, they say, well, how clear are you in your heads of assessing the situation properly? I want to go back to a point you raised and then tie it into the opposition and the expectation that they have. We talked about the era of the Green Movement and the fact that, yes, of course, Mousavi and Karoubi were, of course, challenging the result of the election, but they were still in the context of the regime, its laws, and its constitution. Today's movement, where people say death to the dictator and an end to the Islamic regime, and elements who until yesterday were on their side, who are not joining forces with us, that's the big sea change that the world needs to see. When somebody like Mehdi Nasiri, who was a right-hand person to Ali Khamenei, he was the editor-in-chief of Kayhan newspaper, the equivalent of Pravda in the Soviet Union, who today says we have to work with Reza Pahlavi to usher in an era of change beyond this regime. It's meaning that we're beginning to peel away from the regime and converge with us. Those of us who from the very beginning were secular Democrats vis-a-vis this regime, and former reformists who now are disillusioned and want to join with us. And this is a phenomenon that's happening inside, not in Los Angeles, not in Toronto, not here in Washington, but in Iran itself.
Well, that's a huge change.
It is a huge change.
I think people don't recognize that, again, there are millions of Iranians who despise the regime. There's no doubt, I would say, that there are also hundreds of thousands, if not maybe a few million young men who are Islamists who are willing to go to the streets and kill their fellow Iranians to defend the regime. But what you're pointing out, which I think is really important and is not discussed enough, is there are persuadables inside the regime. There are people who once supported the Islamic Republic who are now recognizing there's no future for an Iran with the Islamic Republic.
Exactly.
And those people
and that's why they say that we need to work
out.
Exactly. And look, many who were the worst enemies of my father want to work with me today towards that solution. And you know what? I've been calling for a coalition of the willing. And I want to simplify one question, if I may. I believe that in this world we have two categories of people in general, whether they're Iranian Americans or others. The first category are people I would qualify as being part of the problem. They're not willing to change. They are hell-bent on their own radical ideas. They are not willing to compromise. They're not willing to abandon or admit when they were wrong in some judgment before. So they continue to be part of the problem. And my friend, I don't waste a minute of my time on them. The second category of people are people who want to be part of the solution. And they are willing to change their ideas. They're willing to adapt to the new circumstances. They're willing to see that now we need to be able to do this. And in my judgment book, I think that the people I want to be able to work with are people who are today committed to a solution that is the best interest of the Iranian people, irrespective of where they stood yesterday. That's the basis of the coalition I want to create and propose. So as long as you understand that the demeanor and the mindset of those who can be part of this diverse coalition of the willing and able, and they are diversified in opinions. There are representatives of the left, of the center, of the right. There are Republicans, there are monarchists. But the issue for us is to achieve the ultimate goal of democratization in Iran on three key fundamental elements. Iran's territorial integrity, which is very important to us. The issue of human rights as a matter of principle and values and systems and laws. And of course, secular democracy, which means a clear separation of religious from governments. I think on that you will discover that the majority of Iranian democratic forces agree on this. There are some groups that we cannot work with. I'll be very honest. We cannot work with the MEK. We cannot work with separatists. And the reason is very simple. Because either they are inherently non-democratic or they go against the grain of challenging or threatening Iran's territorial integrity. I'll be very honest with you. I cannot work with these two groups. But I can work with every other groups, including those who were at some point revolutionaries of yesteryear, but today agree that they were in the wrong path and we need to now regather forces for a better future. So that also goes to the spirit of my view of national reconciliation towards a better future. Maximizing defections from this regime to minimize the resistance against the Iranian people for that change and guarantee that the transition will be as smooth and as least costly to the nation. But I need to have that element of foreign support in this. So that's where I come back and tell those contrarians or naysayers or people who might be worried that are we yet again not sure as what the outcome would be. The devil that we know is better than the devil that we don't, which I think is a big excuse. I say, look among yourselves. Look how many people, just by looking at the Iranian diaspora, you made an allusion to it when living in Toronto. How many successful Iranians who are doctors, who are entrepreneurs, who are CEOs of this and that company, who run the world as we speak, including here in America? How much potential exists between them being the link between who once freed Iran with a country like America? I think President Trump will understand that, at the end of the day, it's good for business as well. When you have entrepreneurs, including one of his people, Elon Musk, who could have a Tesla plant in Baluchistan, for instance. Or we have people from Uber, from eBay, from all of these big Iranian entrepreneurs from Silicon Valley and elsewhere who can commit billions of dollars of investment to rebuild Iran in the future. And this is not just limited to America, mind you. None of this will happen when you have a corrupt regime with a paramilitary mafia running the show, intimidating the world by taking hostages, threatening the existence of a country by trying to wage nuclear war against them and all of that, and you still think that the solution is to negotiate with them? Seriously?
And I agree with you. I mean, and I think it's a critical message to the Trump administration that if you want to make Iran great again, you got to make Iran free again. And the answer is not some nuclear deal that is some minor improvement to the 2015 Obama deal that puts a few more years on the sunsets. Because that deal is only kicking the nuclear can down the road, which is going to explode in our faces. And it's only going to send billions of dollars into the coffers of the regime that it can steal and that it can use for repression and to fund its proxies. Your Highness, I'm to tell you, I'm very worried about another Iran nuclear deal. And I'm very worried about Khamenei running circles around yet another American president. Give us your view of where Khamenei is today versus where he's been over the years.
Our take on the situation is that, Khamenei is getting more and more isolated. The scope of his tent is becoming close, much more limited than it was before. There's more fragmentation within the system. We have seen even in the last few months a lot of dissension among the ranks. And this is an indicator of what's to come. I don't think he can usher in a successful successor to himself. I don't think that he's hoping that his son, Mojtaba, is going to step in. He will even have the credential or the legitimacy to play that role of the supreme leader. There've been talk about some council ruling, but the nation is so beyond that I don't think that the nature of the regime, especially the paramilitary mafia that the IRGC represent, are going to put up with that anymore. So I think we're facing more and more internal dissension and conflict, which is an opportunity to utilize because the regime is at its weakest in that point. And I don't think that Khamenei is going to be let me rephrase it. I wouldn't be surprised if he rejects this proposal, because either way it's lose-lose for him. But at least by rejecting, he tries to maintain the last remnant of his hardcore support behind himself. The minute he caves into that, he loses that as well. So he only expedites his own demise. It's one thing for the calculation in Western diplomacy to think, what's in it for them to accept. They cannot understand that the minute you ask this regime to change its conduct, then it's no longer what it is. The entire raison d'etre has been that. The minute Khamenei is to concede on any of this point, he might as well kiss the Islamic regime goodbye. Of course, he's not going to do that. His last gasp attempt is to keep this regime surviving at any cost. And once again, they might try to pull the wool over the eyes of naive diplomats in the Western world and buy some time for themselves. What else is new? I agree with your point. But guess what? The others who don't see it that way, others who say, whether the rest of the world is lagging behind or not, we have to take initiatives. Bibi Netanyahu took an initiative. If he didn't strike back against Hamas and Hezbollah, we'll still be sitting here. Maybe Bashar Assad will still be sitting in Damascus. Things do change based on certain actions. And today, clarity of the message is very clear. The regime has lost. Let's understand that. That's what Washington needs to understand, London needs to understand, Berlin needs to understand, Paris needs to understand, and of course everybody else in the world needs to understand. What you need to now understand is not that the regime has lost the case, it's that the chances for change in Iran is as its highest right now. But we can give certainty to guarantee a better future by being clear on the alternative. Look, my strategy is to encourage maximum defection so we smooth the process of change by including the majority of those who don't have their hands soiled in the blood of the Iranian people survive regime change. Complete different process of de-Baathification in
So that's,
Iraq,
by the way, a great strategy. It's maximum pressure on the regime, maximum support for the Iranian people, and maximum defection for those inside the regime who understand that their future is tied to a free Iran, not an Islamist Iran.
And that they have a role to play to maintain stability and order. And that's my answer to those who say, well, we don't know what's going to happen next. I guarantee you one thing. If you start dragging your feet yet again, you're only guaranteeing escalation of conflict and a different reality in the world. On the other hand, if you help Iran liberate itself, not only you immediately eliminate most of the problem associated with the regime at once, but you make sure that we can have a very soon-to-be-reached stable future. Because now the people who are out there dealing with you are willing to work with you, have the same values and principles that you are professing, and we can work in absolute partnership to remedy the problems of our region, which are numerous. Water shortages, the economic situation, anything that stand in waiting depending on how long this regime survives. So I think it's this only way to look at it as a win-win proposition. As I said, I'm doing my part together with my fellow Iranians. I hope we will find some partners in the Assad who are willing to join in on this mission that could liberate the entire world. We can have a different world as a result very soon, depending on how fast we are willing to act now.
But you've mentioned a couple of times Israel, and I actually met you for the first time in Israel, in Tel Aviv. And I remember thinking, wow, it is remarkable that you were there. And tell us a little bit about your decision to go. I mean, it was quite a brave decision.